Surprising new entries at number 5 was tribal art. Until recently, objects like this were tucked away in museums, but increasingly they're occupying pride of place in collectors' homes. We explore the true face behind the tribal mask.
Tribal art is highly sophisticated. It is in no sense savage, or the word primitive is just the wrong word for this art. Everything that was made for a purpose. The piece was made for a ceremony, to venerate an ancestor, to promote fertility, to make sure the crops came in, to protect the tribe.
How very, very powerful tribal art can be. Powerful things, nail fetish, kifwebi masks which have enormous protruding eyes and mouth and lots of lines all over them. The way that the body's formed, the legs are formed, the head, or the mask, the force that is created within the forms of these pieces by the native artists is extraordinary.
Cowrie shells, intricately sewn along this hat, demonstrate the deceptive simplicity of tribal art. A spoon figure from the Dan tribe, with a patina that you'd associate with the best English oak furniture. It's not just the exotic variety of categories, from figures to masks and textiles, which makes tribal art such an intriguing field to the collector. They're drawn by the raw power of primitive magic.
I remember my sister coming in one day and seeing a piece I just bought, and she said, "Get it out of here." She was very disturbed by it. But in fact, the piece was made as a healing figure, as a protective figure for the tribe, but it had nails in it, and thus the European concept of witchcraft, and it's that disturbed her. This is a hat from the Cameroons. It's made out of chicken feathers, which are dyed red, and was worn on ceremonial occasions. It is extremely heavy to wear, but it would be worn like that. This mask was made by the Dan tribe of Liberia. The mask was lying on its side for some time, and the hair at the back got caked in mud. The hair should be hanging down, but I rather like the shape it's gone, so I wouldn't dream of altering it. This hat is from the Zulu of South Africa, and it's worn by married women who sew it onto their heads so that they can never take it off, and it's made of human hair. And in order to sleep, they slept on wood neck rests to protect the hat from being damaged.
With so few art galleries dealing in tribal art, it's the auction houses selling pieces from £10,000 to £10,000 that provide the best starting point, arousing some pretty primitive appetites in the aspiring collector.
I remember one wife coming in and sort of saying, "Oh, my husband wants something with enormous boobs." And he hushed her up very quickly and said, "No, no, no, darling, it wasn't that I said." So, but obviously there is some appeal there. But curiously enough, not the male organs. They don't like those too well endowed. You usually have to put a little cloth over those to get people to look at them.
The pursuit of tribal art in the 90s really indicates a desire for something that has a human content and sometimes a spiritual content as well. Tribal objects have a sort of roughness and a texture about them because they are handmade, and this is very, very appealing to people. I think this individuality is something that people have been seeking after, sort of feeling as though they were on a production line for so long.
Times have changed. The first examples of tribal art were brought back from the colonies as battle trophies, certainly not as spiritual icons. This was the art of savages, cursed by witch doctors, brutal weapons for bloodthirsty wars.
They were curiosities. They were signs of how weird and exotic the world could be. Many of the pieces were collected by those old district officers who would go off and live for 20 or 30 years in the bush, and when they came back, they would bring their objects with them. When they died, generally their widows couldn't wait to get rid of them. So they quite frequently were the source of the big collections.
Official opening ceremony, the Governor-General, Lord Christie, wearing
Shields and spears, loincloths and feathers. Great-uncle would have choked in his pink gin at the thought of these as tribal art.
The Swazi method of drinking is to get right down to it. No cocktail sipping for them.
The eyes of the art world were opened when Picasso experimented with the abstract forms that tribal carvers had discerned in the human face for centuries. Matisse was equally fascinated with African art.
It is becoming into the mainstream art market. And I think one of the reasons for that is the collectors of 20th century art, which, as you know, are fetching millions and millions and millions of pounds per piece, are now starting to realize just how much African art inspired the early artists of that period, and are therefore being attracted to tribal art.
Young painters still collect African art.
Tribal art sort of gives me some sort of sense of immediacy, and it's the abstract quality that I love in the objects, really.
Tribal art is so reasonable. I mean, it's on many different levels, but there is a level at which we can go along for £50 and buy something incredibly beautiful.
There was a mask and a paddle, and that's the paddle. And we just had no idea what sort of prices they were going for, and I think that went for £16 or something.
Yeah.
You may be extremely lucky and get something for £10, and I'm talking about a pair of figures. Combs, certain clubs and other things, or all these things would have been laughed out of court 20 years ago. Now, I think because people are looking for things to collect, and it's like belonging to a club. You can have such enormous fun. You can get together with other collectors, swap what you've got, swap your news, go to see exhibitions together, exchange your ideas. Very stimulating.
So what determines the value of a piece?
Age is a very important factor, but age is not the only important factor. Beauty and craftsmanship is the factor. Something that can be 10 years old can be better crafted than something that's 300 years old. But your absolutely nitty-gritty ethnographic collector, he will have a 300 years old and ugly. Whereas somebody like myself buys purely on aesthetic.
Every collector talks about the expression on the face, if it's a mask, the exquisite balance, if it's anything else, the way it's been potted, if it's a pot, a luscious textile. Nobody refers to it. A lot of people say that they couldn't care less if it comes from Africa, Sumatra, or wherever. But no, it's usually the thing itself that's important.